So check this out. We're gonna make sourdough pie crust. All right? What do you think, Daniel? Good idea? What do you like about sourdough pie crust?
It can go on pie.
On what?
It can go on pie.
Right? You like pie. So now one thing about sourdough pie crust is it has leavening in it, and most pie crusts do not have leavening. It's just a I don't know what to call it, just a non-leavened bread, I guess. So why make it sourdough is a good question. Well, I'll tell you why. It actually makes it a fluffier crust. It takes longer to make, only because you're waiting longer overnight really to make it, but it does make a nice, light, fluffy crust. Okay. So I'll just show you the process of making it. Not hard, not difficult at all. It's very similar to the sourdough biscuits I make too, which again, you don't normally use that type of leavening in biscuits, but it works. So first, we have our ingredients here. We've got flour, butter, salt, the sourdough, and some sugar. So all the measurements here are going to be in volume measurements, like cups and tablespoons. Most sourdough recipes, particularly the ones that I use, do not use that. We go by weight, and that's because we want to make sure that things are consistent. But there are a couple recipes that just use volume, and this is one of them. So with that being said, you just want to be sure you're measuring the flour the same each time. So I like to just, in this case anyway, I like to just take the flour, fluff it up a little bit, and then dump it into the bowl. I'm going to put 2.5 cups of flour in. It's okay if you get a little extra. I'm not going to go to 1/2 cup. I'm going to take the 1 cup and fill it up halfway. Part of that is because I don't like to wash dishes. Daniel, do you like to wash dishes? Okay, so I just taught you a dish-saving trick. All right? You like to put away dishes? No. Okay, so I just saved you a dish and put it away. All right? The other reason is, that's probably the main reason, I just want to wash dishes. So, 2.5 cups of flour. I don't know if you can see that, but this is going to make two crusts? Yeah, it's basically a top and a bottom. Or if you're making like a single shell crust, like a coconut cream pie or something, it's going to make the bottom of it. But you'll have two crusts. That's the flour. I'm going to take salt. 1 teaspoon of salt. Level that off. Now, one thing I think everybody should try is take a teaspoon of salt and dump it in your hand so you can see just how much salt that is. I don't think people salt things enough. If they're just adding a little bit of salt and they measure, they don't know just how much it is. Anyway, big deal. And sugar. Now the sugar for this recipe, I will say, is somewhat flexible because if you're making a savory crust, if you're going to make a pot pie or something, you don't want a lot of sugar. If you're making a sweeter pie, like a dessert pie, then you may want some more sugar. So I'm going to put 3 tablespoons in. So we're going to make a sweet pie, right, Daniel? What kind of pie should we make? Chocolate pie. Daniel's favorite chocolate pie. Done with that. And now we're just going to mix this together. You're going to get a few lumps in the flour if it's not sifted, but that's going to get taken care of when we mix the butter in. So I have here 2 cups of butter. This is frozen butter, and I'm going to grate it in there. You can dice it up in the little cubes if you want. You can put it in the food processor to grate it, however you want to do it. I'm going to grate it by hand. The reason I like to grate it, one, it's low tech, it's quiet, food processor's noisy. It's fewer dishes to wash than the food processor anyway. A knife would definitely be less to wash than a cheese grater. But I like the texture of the grated butter when I mix it in. So I'm going to do this for all 4 of these sticks of butter. And what I do is I actually coat the butter in flour when I run it across the grater, partly because I think it helps to keep the butter from sticking to the inside of the grater. And every now and then, my hand will soften the part of the butter that's holding. So rather than letting that get too soft, I just flip it over and grate that side. All right, one thing I do once I grate a cube into the flour is, you can see I've got little grates of butter here. I just like to fluff it into the flour and coat the butter with flour. That's not the last mixing we'll do. We're going to squeeze it together. I just have 2 more sticks of butter to go. I have the butter grated in here. Now, I actually decided to only do 1.5 cubes of butter instead of 4. The reasoning why is because I'm a little forgetful. I've modified this recipe from when I first started doing it. I've added a little bit more flour because I wanted I wanted to roll out a little thicker and make sure I had enough crust for top and bottom. And initially I scaled back the butter to only 1 cup, and part of that was just like, there's a lot of butter, right? So I'd have to look up the original recipe I got it from. But looking at this, I can see there's a lot of butter in here. So I was just thinking I added 2, anyway, 1.5 cups of butter. Like I said, that's somewhat flexible though. If you want more butter, you can add more butter. We'll see how this turns out. Maybe it's supposed to be 2 cups. We'll find it out at the end. Basically, flour and butter's in here. What I'm going to do is just take it in my hands and just squeeze it together. And what that does is it creates these strands of floured butter, layers. Ultimately, you want to layer a flaky layered pie crust. So right now, we're beginning that process of creating these little bits of flakiness and layeredness. So the flakiness and the layers occur when you have bits of butter that are not fully incorporated into the flour. When they bake, they melt and dissolve into the flour in the baking process, but in that process, they leave a void where the butter was. So at least that's how I understand the baking process. If it's different than that, let me know, write in the comments. If you have a different process, is it going to show up here? No, I think the cats just jumped around outside. If you have a different process you go through, let me know. I'm always learning and trying new things. So anyway, so you can see I've got kind of this grainy clumpiness of flour and butter. The next step is to add the liquid. Now the only liquid I add is sourdough. I know traditionally you add cold water to this. And the coldness is partly to keep the butter from getting too soft too quick. Now what I could do is put this in the freezer for a little bit. You know what? I'm going to do that. I'm going to put it in the freezer. Be right back. I'm going to pull this out of the freezer. All that did was stiffen up these clumps. So now I can add the sourdough. Now the recipe says for about a cup of sourdough. Now this is where volume measurements are a little tricky, because with sourdough, depending on what stage your sourdough is at, it can be very airy and bubbly, or mine is actually right now, I didn't feed it last night like I should have, so it's a little, so if you know what that means is in a cup there will be actually more weight in here than normal. So all that means is when I add this to the flour mixture here, I'm going to do a little bit at a time, mix it in, and just add more as needed. Okay, I have a general idea how much I need, and I'm willing to be flexible based off of my understanding what the pie crust should look like at this point in the process. So, I'm going to scoop up about a cup, scrape off the extra there, and all I do is I make a little well in the bottom of this container here, and I just pour in sourdough. I'm going to pour in probably about most of that, just based off of my own experience there. I'm going to use my hands and toss the stuff on the side into that center part to get it wet. I don't like using my hands for that because I don't want sticky sourdough on my hands. It's not the end of the world, it'll all come off in the crust. So rubber spatula looks great for this. All I want to do is just keep turning this. You can see that here's the clump of the wetness. I'm going to take the dryness, kind of stretch it across the wet sourdough. All I want to do is make sure that everything gets damp and that all will clump together in one solid mass. If it's too wet, it just becomes really unwieldy, it won't roll out as nice, and it will probably be a little stickier and more glutinous, meaning it won't be as flaky, it'll be a little more of a solid crust, which isn't bad. You can eat it. I mean, you can eat that. It's not going to taste bad. It just won't have the same texture. So, depending on the texture you like, you can do what you like. If you want it a little less flaky, then all that means is maybe put a tiny bit more liquid in and mix it a little bit more. You know, as much as I don't want to use my hands, I really find it's the best way to just feel what the dough is doing, the crust is doing. All I'm doing is just taking this and kind of squeezing it together. You can see there's still some dryness in there, but it's starting to clump together. You start getting these bigger masses, and that's what I want. If you don't get enough liquid in there, then when you go to roll it out, it will just kind of fall apart. It won't stick together enough, and that can be I think more problematic because it's just hard to make a pie crust under those circumstances. I'm going to add a little bit more, but not much. Some drips. All I'm trying to do is get rid of all of the dry little bits. You know what? Let me put it on the counter so you guys can see exactly what it looks like. We'll put it back in the bowl in a second. But you can see there's still some bits that are not quite incorporated. I'm basically just going to squish it all together. I don't want to squish it too much. The more you work it, you know, that will develop more gluten, and that's not what we want. This is not a bread dough, you know, where you have all the air pockets and gluten and all that development. More of it's pie crust, right? So what you can do also is just take it and fold it and kind of smear it just a little bit on the counter to get all the clumps off my fingers here. This actually looks pretty good. Again, you want to make sure it stays pretty cool. The longer you work it, the warmer it's going to get, and the easier it is for that butter to dissolve into the flour, or absorb into the flour, I guess. Dissolve, but this is basically the crust right here. I'm going to just form it into a ball, and this is the point where it's, I shouldn't say the point, but it's one more point where sourdough pie crust is a little bit different than regular pie crust, because this now sits back in this bowl. I'm going to cover it, let it sit on the counter for at least 8 hours. Okay. I'm making pie really late tonight, or I can do it tomorrow. So with sourdough, what you want it to do is ferment. You want that sourdough to react with the flour and begin to break it down. Okay? And that's going to add more air to this crust as well. So that just takes some time. One of the nice things about sourdough is the long fermentation process, and that can be controlled by you, how long it ferments. So this is going to sit on the counter for about 8 hours at least. You can do it longer. Don't let it go too much longer than that, because it will just start to break down too much in that fermentation process. After we ferment it for about 8 hours, it's going to probably double in bulk just on its own, just by the natural leavening process. We're going to divide it in half and create basically 2 patties, I guess, and put them in the refrigerator to stiffen up. Once they're stiff, then we'll roll it out into the pie crust. But for now, I'm going to cover it with some plastic wrap. Fast forward that. That's it for about 8 hours. Okay, so we'll come back in 8 hours and show you the next step. Let me show you the crust. Now, I forgot to show you in the bowl what it looks like when I put it in, but basically it was all smooth. And now, let me go over here and you can see this. You can see these cracks that formed in it. That is all due to the fermentation. Just where the culture, the yeast, has eaten some flour, let off some carbon dioxide, and it's risen a little bit. Now, this will go in the refrigerator overnight because it's late. We won't make pie till tomorrow. So what I'm going to do now is take this and weigh it and divide it in half by weight. Maybe a little OCD, but sometimes it's just the way I do things. So, put the bowl on the scale, turn the scale on, crust in the bowl. So I'm at 971 ounces, or no, excuse me, grams, not ounces, ounces. So 971 divided in half requires a lot of math. So 900 divided in half is 450, plus 35, 475. We'll find out if I did that right. That's 482. You know, pull a little off. I want to be very gentle with this. I really don't want to disturb the dough too much. It's 476. We'll call that good. I'm going to weigh the other one to see if I did my math right. Really, it's a little satisfying to know that I did that. 494. So somewhere I didn't do my math right. Take a little bit off of here. Put it on here. That one's at 488. Let's see how close. I guess that's right. 486. No, I don't remember. 482. Okay. Yeah. So I'm going to take a tiny bit off of this one. Put it on there. 484. Let's see how close this is. Like I said, I'm pretty obsessive about getting these pretty close. 486. That's close enough. Okay, basically 2 halves. So what I do now, again, I don't want to roll this out. I just want to take this, gently form it into a ball, flatten it down, because I don't want that butter to be super disturbed. Okay? And I don't want to develop the gluten any more than it will happen naturally by it being wet. So I take this, take a piece of plastic wrap and just wrap it up. This is just a way to conceal it when I put it in the refrigerator. Okay, so there's one. Let me get the other one. Get this ball out of the way. I'm gonna form it into a ball and then just smash it flat. So one reason why I smash it flat is because ultimately it's going to be rolled out. So this just helps start it off easier than having to roll out a round ball, because it will stiffen up in the refrigerator. Also, it will cool off faster because it doesn't take as much energy to get that cooler into the core of the crust. So wrap that up in plastic. And that's it. The next step will happen tomorrow when we roll out these crusts to make pie. Dan, you still want chocolate pie? Okay. What do you want, whipped cream or meringue on top? Options, right? This world is full of options. Meringue? All right, we'll do that. Meringue on chocolate pie. These just go in the refrigerator.